At a glamorous party, a millionaire humiliates his maid in front of everyone, thinking he has all the power. But what happens next shocks everyone in the room. Will this maid's quiet strength be enough to turn the tables on her cruel employer? Sophia had always worked harder than most, enduring long hours and harsh conditions to support her younger siblings. Losing both parents at a young age, she had become the sole provider, juggling multiple jobs. Her days were filled with endless chores, but her resolve never wavered. Despite the hardships, she held on to the hope that one day her efforts would lead to something better. Her employer, Mr. Hargrove, however, didn't see her struggles. To him, Sophia was just another servant, a tool to be used for his comfort. He often belittled her in front of guests, making cruel jokes about her appearance or the way she spoke. His laughter echoed in the hallways, a constant reminder of her place in his world. Sophia, though hurt by his words, remained silent, choosing dignity over confrontation. But deep down, she yearned for more, a life where she could be seen for who she truly was. Sophia had never received an invitation like this before. When she saw the envelope addressed to her, her heart skipped a beat. It was from her employer, Mr. Hargrove. She stared at the elegant handwriting, the kind used for formal invitations to exclusive events, and for a moment, she wondered if she was mistaken. Surely this couldn't be real. She slowly opened the envelope, revealing the card inside. "You are cordially invited to attend my grand celebration," it read. The words seemed out of place coming from him. Mr. Hargrove had always treated her like an invisible presence, a servant there to do his bidding. She had never once been invited to any of his lavish parties, let alone treated as an equal. The very idea seemed absurd. Sophia was torn. Her first instinct was to discard the invitation, to ignore it as if it had never arrived. After all, she knew the kind of people who would be attending, wealthy, beautiful people, who would never give a second thought to someone like her. She had seen the parties before. She had overheard stories from the other staff members, heard the laughter echoing through the halls, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of expensive conversation. She had seen the women in designer gowns, the men in tailored suits, all living in a world far removed from hers. But something inside her stirred. She couldn't ignore it. For a moment, she wondered if this could be her opportunity, her chance to show Mr. Hargrove that she was more than just his maid, more than just the person who cleaned up after his guests and did the menial tasks. This could be the moment when he finally saw her as a person, as someone with dignity and value. She spent the next few hours looking at the card in her hands, contemplating whether she should attend. There were so many reasons not to go. She didn't have the money to buy a proper dress. She had nothing that could compete with the opulence of the women who would be there. The thought of stepping into that world made her feel small, insignificant. But there was another part of her that said this could be her chance to stand tall, to rise above the life she had been given. After much deliberation, she decided to go. She couldn't let fear dictate her choices. She couldn't let her insecurities hold her back. This was her moment, or so she thought. She spent hours looking through her wardrobe, trying to find something that would be suitable for the event. She didn't have the luxury of a designer dress, nor the money for a new one. But she had to make do. She found an old dress, a simple black one that was still in decent condition. It wasn't fancy, but it would have to do. She spent time trying to do her hair and makeup as best as she could, knowing that no matter what, she would never match the elegance of the other women at the party. When the night of the event arrived, she stood in front of the mirror, uncertain and nervous. She had never felt more out of place in her life. The gown wasn't the sparkling ball gown she imagined, and her makeup didn't do justice to the flawless faces she had seen in the photos from Mr. Hargrove's past events. She sighed, adjusted the hem of her dress, and took a deep breath before heading out the door. The ride to the mansion felt long, each mile only deepening her anxiety. As the grand house came into view, her heart raced. The lights shone bright, and the sound of music and laughter echoed through the streets. She felt a mix of excitement and dread as she approached the entrance. This was the world of the rich, the elite, the world that had always seemed so far out of reach. When she walked through the grand doors, the grandiosity of the mansion took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and guests in their finest attire mingled, laughing, sipping champagne. It was everything she had imagined, and more. She felt like a fish out of water, completely out of place. As she made her way through the crowd, trying to blend in and not draw attention to herself, she caught sight of Mr. Hargrove. He was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of influential guests. When he saw her, he smiled that familiar smug smile. He made his way toward her, his eyes gleaming with an unmistakable glint of satisfaction. Sophia's heart sank as he stopped in front of her, his presence towering over her. This was it. She had made her decision to come here, but it felt like a mistake now. She wished she could just disappear. "Ah, there she is," Mr. Hargrove said, raising his voice to ensure everyone could hear. "The surprise guest of the evening. Sophia, my maid. I hope she's dressed appropriately for tonight's celebration." His tone was dripping with mockery, and the guests around him erupted in laughter. Sophia stood there, her face flushing with embarrassment. The humiliation had begun, just as she feared. This wasn't a chance for her to be seen as an equal. It was all part of his cruel game. Sophia stood frozen, each gaze a heavy weight that crushed her spirit. The laughter around her wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow, each mocking laugh another slash at her dignity. She felt the walls of the room close in on her, the air thick with ridicule. Her body seemed to shrink, each step heavier than the last. Mr. Hargrove's grin stretched, almost too wide, dripping with malevolence. His eyes didn't just gleam, they glowed with a sadistic pleasure, watching as she became the punchline of his cruel game. The room felt like a stage, but she wasn't just a performer. She was the joke. "Everyone, please welcome my maid," he announced loudly, his voice cutting through the air. "Isn't she the most surprising guest?" The guests chuckled, some snickering behind their hands. Sophia could feel her cheeks burn with humiliation. She wanted to disappear, to find a way out of this nightmare, but there was nowhere to hide. As she walked deeper into the room, she could feel the eyes of the guests following her every move, judging her every step. She could hear whispered comments about her dress, her hair, the way she walked. The tension in her chest tightened with each passing moment. All of a sudden, the grand party, the sparkling chandeliers, the laughter, the music, felt like an alien world, and she was the outsider. She tried her best to keep her head held high, to walk with some semblance of dignity, but inside she was crumbling. The last thing she wanted was to be the center of attention, especially for something so cruel. Mr. Hargrove continued his charade, introducing her to more guests, pushing her further into the spotlight with each moment. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had hoped for a chance to prove her worth, but instead, she had become the butt of his cruel joke. She looked around, avoiding the eyes of the guests who were now whispering amongst themselves, their amusement only growing with each second. Sophia didn't know how long she could endure this. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to escape. But she stayed, silently enduring the ridicule. She had no choice. She couldn't turn back now. But deep down, she knew that this humiliation wouldn't define her. Not for long. Sophia could feel her composure slowly cracking. The laughter of the guests still echoed in her ears, their mocking gazes weighing heavily on her. She had tried so hard to keep her dignity intact, to stand tall in a room that didn't belong to her. But every whispered comment, every sarcastic glance, chipped away at her resolve. Her hands were shaking, and her throat tightened with the pressure of holding back tears. She excused herself as gracefully as she could and made her way toward the back of the room, away from the crowd. As she passed, she overheard one guest remarking on her dress, another commenting on how out of place she seemed. Each comment felt like a dagger to her heart. Finally, she reached the corner of the room, a quiet space where she could escape the cruel eyes of those around her. Her breath came in shaky gasps, and she wiped away the first tear that slid down her cheek. The world around her blurred as she tried to regain control, but the hurt was unbearable. She had been humiliated, in front of everyone. Her entire life had led her to this moment, and now all she felt was the crushing weight of failure. Sophia sank against the wall, unable to hold it in any longer. Her sobs were quiet at first, but soon they became uncontrollable. The tears flowed freely, a release of all the pain she had carried for so long. For a moment, it seemed as if the world had stopped. The laughter, the judgment, it all faded into the background. She was alone in her pain, isolated in a crowd of people who would never understand. But then, just as she thought she might crumble under the weight of it all, a voice broke through the silence. "Are you all right?" Sophia looked up, startled. Standing before her was Madeline, a guest who had noticed her retreat. Madeline's expression was filled with genuine concern, a stark contrast to the cruel faces she had seen earlier. Sophia wiped her eyes quickly, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Madeline crouched down next to her, her tone soft but firm. "No, you're not. You don't deserve this. No one does." Sophia looked at Madeline, surprised by her kindness. She had never expected this, especially not here, in a place where wealth and power ruled. Madeline seemed to see right through the facade, and for the first time that night, Sophia felt like someone truly understood her. "Mr. Hargrove, he's not what he seems," Madeline said quietly. "I know things about him, things you wouldn't believe. But you have a strength in you. Don't let him win." Sophia blinked, her tears slowly subsiding. Madeline's words sank in, and she felt a flicker of something, hope. Perhaps this humiliation wasn't the end. Perhaps it was the beginning of something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. Sophia rose slowly, her body trembling, not just from the tears, but from the overwhelming shock of it all. Her mind raced, every thought tangled in a whirlwind of disbelief. But then, her gaze met Madeline's. It was as if the room had suddenly quieted, the chaos fading into the background. Madeline's eyes weren't just filled with sympathy. They were filled with understanding, a lifeline reaching out to pull her from the abyss. In that moment, for the first time that night, Sophia felt something shift deep inside her. A flicker of strength, of defiance. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as she had believed. Maybe she didn't have to accept this humiliation as her fate. Maybe she could change the course of this night. Her breath steadied as she wiped the last of her tears away. The quiet corner of the room no longer felt like an escape. She knew what she had to do. She had to return. Not as the maid who had been humiliated, but as the woman who was determined to take control of her own story. With newfound resolve, Sophia straightened her back, squared her shoulders, and made her way back into the heart of the party. This time she wouldn't shrink in the shadows. She would face the room, face the cruelty, and change the narrative. As she walked, she noticed the guests had shifted in their demeanor, still laughing, still mocking, but a flicker of doubt now lingered in the air. Sophia wasn't sure how she would do it, but the time for being quiet and invisible was over. She approached the center of the room, where Mr. Hargrove stood laughing with a few of his closest guests. They were still discussing her, their words laced with sarcasm, when Sophia calmly stepped in, joining the conversation. "Mr. Hargrove," she began, her voice steady but firm, drawing their attention, "I have something to say." The room quieted, and all eyes turned toward her. For a moment Sophia hesitated, but then she continued, her words flowing with a surprising confidence. "You may think you can humiliate me for your entertainment," she said, her gaze unwavering, "but I am not the fool you think I am. I know things you don't, things that could destroy the very image you've worked so hard to build." The words hung in the air, and the guests exchanged looks of confusion and intrigue. Mr. Hargrove's smile faltered for a split second as he met her gaze, clearly unnerved. Sophia could feel the power shifting. The game had changed. This wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about revealing the truth, about showing them all who she really was, a woman with the strength to face the darkness and turn it into light. Sophia's words hung in the air like a challenge, her eyes never leaving Mr. Hargrove's. The guests around her began to murmur, confused and curious, unsure of what she was talking about. Sophia could feel the tension building, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It was now or never. "Don't play coy," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I know about the money you've been funneling through your so-called charity. I know about the embezzlement, the funds you've been stealing from those who truly need it. The millions you've hidden away, all while pretending to be some philanthropist." Her words cut through the room like a sharp knife. There was no more pretense, no more hiding. She had seen the signs, the discrepancies in his financial reports, the hidden transactions, and now she was ready to expose him for who he really was. The guests went silent, their eyes wide with shock. Mr. Hargrove's face turned pale, his confident demeanor quickly crumbling. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Sophia stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You thought you could humiliate me, make me the punchline of your joke. But in doing so, you've exposed yourself, Mr. Hargrove. You're nothing but a fraud, a man who hides behind his wealth and power while robbing those who need help the most." The guests were no longer amused. Whispers spread through the crowd, and some began to reach for their phones, eager to capture the moment. Sophia had done what no one else dared to do. She had brought down the man who thought he was untouchable. Mr. Hargrove finally found his voice, but it was shaky, desperate. "You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but the room wasn't buying it. They had seen enough, and his image, carefully crafted over the years, was shattered in an instant. Sophia stood tall, her head held high. The room had shifted. No longer was she the object of ridicule, now she was the one in control, and Mr. Hargrove was the one who had everything to lose. The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Hargrove, once the center of attention, now stood before his guests, his face pale and his composure shattered. The air was thick with tension as he stammered, unable to regain control of the situation. "Wait. This is all a misunderstanding," he muttered, his voice shaking. "Sophia doesn't know what she's talking about. This is just a mistake." But his words fell flat. The crowd was no longer on his side. The laughter that once echoed in the halls had been replaced with shocked murmurs, some guests shaking their heads in disbelief. The foundation of his carefully constructed empire was crumbling, and he could do nothing to stop it. Sophia stood, unwavering, as the room turned against him. "No, Mr. Hargrove," she said calmly. "This is no mistake. You've been lying to everyone here for years. You've used your position to hide your greed, your deceit, and now it's over." His eyes darted nervously from person to person, his usual arrogance replaced by fear. "Please," he begged, his voice nearly breaking. "I'll make it right. I'll fix everything. Just don't expose me. I'll do anything." But the guests were already turning their backs on him. The damage was done. His reputation, built on lies and manipulation, had been torn apart in seconds. The very people who once admired him now saw him for who he truly was, a man who used others for his own gain. Sophia's gaze was steady, her resolve stronger than ever. She had done it. She had taken control of the narrative, exposed the truth, and now the man who had humiliated her was begging for mercy. As Mr. Hargrove continued to plead, Sophia took a deep breath. She had come to this party expecting to be a victim, expecting to be silenced. But instead she had become the one in power. She had found her voice, and now it was his turn to listen. The once grand party had turned into chaos. Guests began to leave in a hurry, some still muttering about the scandal they had just witnessed. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, everything had fallen silent. The chandeliers that had once shimmered so brightly now seemed to dim in the wake of Mr. Hargrove's fall from grace. Sophia stood in the center of the room, her posture tall and unwavering. Her eyes scanned the crowd, seeing the shocked faces, the disbelief. No one could look at Mr. Hargrove the same way again. His empire of lies had crumbled in front of everyone, and there was no coming back from this. The man who had once been untouchable was now a shadow of himself, pleading for mercy that would never come. As guests trickled out, Madeline approached Sophia with a warm, understanding smile. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You took control, and you exposed the truth." Sophia gave a small, relieved smile. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "Everyone here saw it too. It wasn't just about me standing up for myself. It was about standing up for what's right." Madeline nodded. "And you gave others the courage to do the same." Sophia felt the weight of the evening lift off her shoulders. She had come to this party as a victim, humiliated and crushed under the weight of Mr. Hargrove's cruelty. But now, she was walking away with something far more valuable, her dignity, her strength, and the knowledge that she had the power to change her own story. Madeline placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I want you to work for me. You deserve a chance to build the life you've always dreamed of." Sophia's eyes widened, surprised by the offer. It was the opportunity she had never thought possible. With the last of the guests leaving, she turned to face Mr. Hargrove one last time. He stood by himself, his head bowed, humiliated beyond words. But Sophia didn't feel any satisfaction in his downfall. She had already taken the higher ground. It wasn't about revenge, it was about moving forward. As she walked toward the door, her heart felt light. She had faced her darkest moment, and from it, she had emerged stronger than ever. The future was hers to shape, and for the first time in a long time, she was free. As Sophia stepped outside into the cool night air, she took a deep breath, letting the quiet calm of the evening settle around her. The world seemed different now, quieter, as if the weight of the evening's events had shifted the very air she breathed. She had walked into that party as an outsider, humiliated and unsure of her place in a world that didn't seem to care about her. But she had left as a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her worth. Looking back at the mansion, Sophia knew this night would change her forever. She had exposed the truth, not only about Mr. Hargrove, but about herself. In the face of cruelty and humiliation, she had stood tall. She had refused to be a victim. She had claimed her power. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, but now, she faced them with confidence. This was just the beginning. She had learned a powerful lesson, that true strength wasn't about power or wealth. It was about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. Sophia paused for a moment, looking up at the stars above. There, beneath the vast sky, she realized something important. Her story wasn't just about revenge, it was about redemption. The real victory was the person she had become, the courage she had found within herself. As she walked into the future, Sophia felt a sense of peace. She had overcome the darkness, and now she was ready to embrace the light.